Something foul has come to the world of Faerun, affecting even its most animalistic residents. Thankfully, a wood elf huntress raised by loyal animals has come to save the day. That means she'll use her dashing good looks to disarm enemies, her family members to disarm them in the more literal sense, and of course her sniping skills with a bow to protect all those that she can. Will it be enough to save the forests of Faerun and remove the tadpole planted in her head? We've got one way to find out, but first, the rules. No other party members, though temporary companions such as summons are of course a-okay. No multiclassing, no illithid powers, no karmic dice, no barrelmancy or chessmancy, no saving in the middle of combat, and we're playing with the honor mode rule set, so we'll be keeping it that way. With all that said, let's move on to character creation. To start off, our race is a wood half-elf, mainly for the extra 1.5 meters of move speed to help our positioning. Our background of choice is of course an outlander to go with our forest warrior vibes. The stats are supposed to end up looking like this, but unfortunately I screwed it up by choosing the class last and caused them to partially reset without noticing, so they end up more like this. Don't worry, we'll fix it as soon as we get the ability to respec. And for our class, we are naturally a ranger, picking ranger knight and beast tamer for our favorite enemy and natural explorer, giving us heavy armor proficiency as well as find familiar. Finally, we make our astounding archer look like the forest creature she is and give her a name befitting a lady of her status. And so, Astrid Fletcher, guardian of all that is green, is here to save the day. Our champion awakens on a burning nautiloid, disoriented with no animal companions in sight and a single goal in mind, to get to safety and summon our family. As soon as we get heading towards the helm, we bump into a talking brain that kind of reminds us of a cat, so we pop it out of its skull. And just like that, get us, our first of many animal companions to come, although hopefully most of them are less, disturbing. The two of us continue our journey and are quickly ambushed by a Gith warrior ready to murk us. At the same time, a group of imps also join the fray. While the fight kicks off, us starts obliterating an imp, and while she's not looking, we trip our would-be assassin into the void. Whew, that was a close one. From here, the remaining imps are easy to clean up with the combined efforts of our two adventurers. Soon after, we find ourselves in the helm properly, and without all of our animal friends, we simply do not have what it takes to deal with whatever the heck is going on in here. So instead, we run all the way to the end in order to tickle some teleporting tentacles, which brings us crashing down on a cozy little beach. The next morning, we wake up once again alone, but this time ready to start our journey properly. Starting of course by scavenging the first hat that we see, since every forest dweller knows to not waste what you find laying about. Then our raven familiar bumps into some intellect devourers the hard way, leaving us to blow up one of them with a flaming bolt to a nautiloid tank. And the other goes down to just a single crossbow bolt, getting us our first level up and the ability to cast spells, for which we choose Hunter's Mark and Longstrider for both more damage and more movement speed for us and our summons. We also get to choose the archery fighting style, increasing our ranged attack rolls by a whopping 2, which may not seem like a lot, but I promise you it really is. As we get searching for a place to recuperate, we stumble across some fellow forest folk being set upon by gruesome goblins. So we jump into action to try and save the day, beginning with a Hunter's Mark and crossbow bolt on the closest goblin, taking them out instantly. Meanwhile, the enemies seem to much prefer missing their attacks, which is a-okay with me. Our crab familiar even gets in on the action too, bringing their prey low enough for us to take out with a bonus action so we can devote a full bolt for tougher foes. Unfortunately, our allies start going down at this point, but this only enrages our side, leading us to show absolutely no mercy, as now bodies on both teams are dropping fast. One more of our crew does go down, but at the very least we clean up quickly afterwards. Once inside, we get up to all sorts of things. We talk to some rats, convince some tieflings to protect their fellow refugees, learn to play every instrument ever in about 3 minutes flat, help a bird properly decorate his nest, save a child from a very clearly evil druid, and offer to deal with the local goblin problem in order to save the rest of the tieflings. After all of that, we head into the wilderness and bump into a villain befitting our warrior princess, a devil by the name of Raphael. He offers to fix our tadpole problem lickety-split, but Astrid has seen enough fairy tales play out to know not to trust him, so he buggers off and we go on our merry way, only to stumble into some absolute cultists who messed with an owl bear and found out the consequences. Either way, we tell the survivors to bugger off as well and go check to make sure the animal is alright. Indeed, she's got a piece of a spear still stuck inside alongside her, but she says she doesn't need any help, so we leave both her and her cub in peace. Our animal adventures ain't over yet, as now we find a lonesome dog with his recently deceased master. It turns out they were attacked by some gnolls nearby, and while we can't avenge him quite just yet, we do tell Scratch here to join us in camp when he's ready to move on. All of this grants us level 3, earning a third spell in the form of Jump alongside a third first level spell slot to go with it. More importantly, we get our Beastmaster subclass, giving us the Ranger's Companion feature, which lets us summon a bear, boar, raven, wolf, or spider once per short rest to help us out in combat. To start, they're not that great, but they get better the higher level we are, and as a side note, we also named them all individually, so check out the description for the full list of names. Continuing on, we find ourselves in a nearby village infested with goblins. They haven't spotted us yet, so we let our new spider get the jump on them. Unfortunately, it fails to hit at all, and we fail to finish off the goblin we target too, but thanks to the surprise round, we can still go for a web, as well as take out the now low health gobbo. On their turns, only one of the goblins manages to hit our arachnid ally, but the misfest continues onto our side as well, only for our poor pal to get taken out a moment later. Somehow, Astrid seems to do better on her own, killing another one of them, but in retaliation, one starts just straight up shooting through the solid roof, while another breaks our concentration. So we whip out the elemental arrows to deal big damage, run away in order to make enemies struggle to reach us, and heal up with a potion. Still, we get shot, this time through a wall and a roof, and to make matters worse, he also taunts us by doing whatever the heck this is. We do manage to take out a booyag that's been bugging us, however, I think we need to accept that there is no avoiding this quantum goblin and his never-ending supply of fire arrows. At least we managed to defeat our nemesis a couple arrows later, and his sole remaining pal goes down swiftly too. After all that, we definitely need to take a rest, and the next morning, our newest friend Scratch decides to join us for good. Then we're back to exploring the village and finding yet more goblins, this time torturing a deep gnome. Thankfully, they're easy enough to intimidate into scampering away, and just like that, we free poor old Barkus Root here, who doesn't stick around for long since he's got an adventure of his own to go on. Further down the road, we find the entrance to the goblin camp. Thing is, they'll only let us in if we wear some warg dung. But I mean, hey, wouldn't be the first time we've lathered ourselves in dung in order to further a hunt. Now that we're actually allowed in, we start going just to get struck by a killer headache and hear the voice of the Absolute start talking about what are undoubtedly future hunts. Before we're overwhelmed, this handy-dandy artifact shows up to clear them away, alongside whoever this lady is. As nice as we're sure she is, we work best with just animals, so we tell her we'll be traveling solo. Inside the camp proper, we meet Grat the trader, who sells us the gloves of archery, increasing all of our ranged weapon attacks damage by 2, which isn't much, but every bit adds up. And now that we've made it all the way here, this strange skeleton man also shows up in our traveling home, letting us at last fix our ability scores to what they were actually intended to be. Back to the goblin camp, we also find the owlbear cub we met earlier, as it seems these goblins got the mama bear. But at the very least, we use our persuasive prowess to convince both the goblins and the cub that it's best the whippersnapper comes with us. Now Astrid has yet another animal joining us for our adventures. Speaking of bird brains in need of rescue, we also find the legendary author Volothamp imprisoned, so after taking out his guard, we free the old scamp and tell him to join the rest of our ever-growing horde. Once that's done, we get looking around every nook and cranny and end up finding an entrance to the Underdark, where hopefully we can power up before taking on the goblins. While we're down here, we stumble across a boulette which we admire from a very safe distance before continuing onwards, whereupon we find some fungal friends of the forest who welcome us into their colony as one of their own. And the first thing we do in here is talk to Dareth Bonecloak to buy the Caustic Band. This handy-dandy hand adornment grants all of our weapon attacks +2 acid damage, which once again isn't a lot, but with all of these little buffs we are getting somewhere. Elsewhere nearby, we find a poisoned deep gnome who desperately needs an antidote. Our search for one leads us back to the Blighted Village, where in addition to the poison's cure, we find a group of mercenary ogres working for the Absolute. A bit of convincing is all it takes for them to agree to fight for us with the false promise of 1,000 gold after the job is done, resulting in them giving us a bone horn to summon them that we can't help but feel was not ethically sourced. Upon giving the deep gnome an antidote, she tells us there's some Dwergar slavers across a lake that need their butts kicked, and she gives us the boost of speed stolen from them to help. With these boots, we gain the ability to dash as a bonus action, an extremely convenient thing to have when we mainly want to be shooting enemies from as far away as possible anyways. Deciding the goblin camp can wait, we head to the lake and bump into a Dwergar scouting party looking for the very boots we were just given. After a bit of convincing, they let us pass, telling us to go deliver the boots to their sergeant ourselves. Knowing the importance of a good set of hiking boots, Astrid doesn't really intend to hand away her newest bit of fantastic footwear, but certainly won't say no to a free ride across the lake. Once we make it across, we find that there's trouble in paradise for these poor slavers. Their absolutist leader has caused a rockfall, and worst of all, got himself stuck without paying these people. If you ask me, it seems like our prey has an exploitable weakness. But before our ranger can get setting her trap, first we hit level 4, granting us our very first feat, for which we take an ability improvement, bumping our dex up to 19 and a +4 modifier. In the process, making us better at most of what we do. Attacks, damage, initiative, saving throws, and AC all go up from this. Now it's time to get to work. We convince Elder Brithvar here that we want revenge on True Soul Nier just like him. All we need to do to get him on our side is knife the surveilling scrying eye. Or, well, throw it off a cliff, that's probably good enough too. After that, our next step is to blow up the cave-in and free Nier so we can shank him as one big group. Yet, as we're looking for explosives, instead we find some animals being abused and ready to strike back against their owners. Naturally, we decide to help them in the ensuing fight. Astrid starts her slaughter by shoving one of the sinful slavers off the edge, and shortly follows up by yeeting another one right after with the help of a strength elixir. Both our spider companion and one of the deep roads starts working away at the remaining Dwergar, who unfortunately takes out the first of our new friends before we can stop him. With just him left, our whole crew gets to focus fire on the lone Dwergar, leaving him to retaliate, this time thankfully on Astrid instead of our animals. Meaning it's nice and easy for us to clean up, freeing at least one of the animals in the process. Now that that's done, we gather up some explosives and at last pop open Nier's cave-in. Out comes sauntering the big man himself, who immediately cements himself as a petulant psycho by yeeting one of the slaves into the lava. Figuring it's better late than never, with that we send the signal to Brithvar to start our ambush. Kicking off the fight, we shove an enemy away so that we can shoot someone flanking us and skedaddle back to the exit of the room for safety. While the enemies start pouring bolt after bolt at our allies, one of said allies shoves the fellow we shoved earlier right into a magma pit. On our spider's turn, we shoot out a web that ignites immediately, presumably because of the lava that's 5 feet down, were I to guess. To make matters worse, one of our foes also mind controls someone on our side. Thankfully, Astrid is here to save the day with a hunter's mark followed up by a bow shot to break the concentration and set our pal free. And while we get ready to fall back further, even more allies join on our side. Unfortunately, Nier's ne'er-do-wells sure try and even the playing field regardless. Admittedly, they do a pretty good job too. Still, we're not too worried as we pepper folks from the back line, even if Brithvar insists on hurting himself against Nier's retaliatory legendary action. Our animal companion all the while continues to do nothing, and perhaps out of pity, so do the not-so-deadly Dwergars that we're facing. Eventually, the curse of misses is lifted as our spider bites the dust, but once the seal is broken, enemy after enemy starts going down like dominoes. Once most of his cruel cronies are out of the way, all it takes is a few shots to get rid of the big man too, and the last of them goes out right afterwards. Of course, before we let Brithvar go, first we intimidate him into freeing all the slaves. Can't leave a job half done after all. And look who we should find but Barkus Root, our friend from earlier who's off to Moonrise Towers, the cultist headquarters, to free a buddy of his. Since that gives us direction of where to go once we're done with the goblins, we tell him to join our ever-expanding posse back at camp. Then we head deeper into Grimforge, where we stumble across an armor mold as well as some animated armor just waiting to get thrown into the lava. A good shove on another one, an even better throw on the third of these, and a well-placed arrow is all it takes to clean up the rest of them, letting our heroic huntress grab the mithril ore that they were guarding. Further in, we find the titular forge of this place and pop in both the mold as well as the ore we picked up. Lowering the platform, things start to feel a little bit off. Our animal instincts kick in and we decide to walk back up to the overlook. Sure enough, upon shooting the lava valve with our bow, Grim, a giant metal golem guardian, emerges ready to whoop the booty of anyone who's near. Joke's on him though, cause we're definitely not near. Once we've got the lava flowing and weakening Grimm's defenses, we catch its attention and drag it into initiative. From here, we just pelt it with a returning pike that we found earlier, since whenever it lands on him it deals guaranteed crushing damage due to gravity. Eventually, the big fella's raging drags out the local magma methods, but we just take a step back and enjoy the show as Grimm stomps them into dust. Then we're back to pelting it with the pike for a little bit until it's super low health, whereupon we switch to our bow to make sure we get the experience as crushing damage rarely rewards it. Our huntress takes an awfully efficient shortcut down to grab her trophies, which we make using the forge, the adamantine splint armor, and the adamantine shield. Both of these items give crit immunity, but the armor also reduces all damage we take by 2, and when we're hit in melee, our opponent gets sent reeling for 3 turns, meaning they have a -1 penalty to attacks for each turn remaining. Conveniently enough, our shield also grants 2 turns of reeling when they miss. Unfortunately, as powerful as these items are, they are not going to be long-term additions. We've already gone on quite the detour at this point, so what's a little bit more? Now that we're geared up, it's time to take out the disgusting perversions of nature that are the gnolls which killed Scratch's old master. The newborn gnolls that we find on the road go down lickety-split, and with a surprise round on their nearby friends, they're not too much of a challenge either. We even summoned the goodest boy himself to get in on the fun. With his brief assistance, this pack of gnolls never stood a sheep's chance in a tiger's den. All that's left of the gnolls are a horde of them that are pestering a couple of folks in a cave. Lucky for them, Astrid Fletcher and her pack are here to save the day. While they're surprised, our spider pal webs a few of them up. Scratch finishes the already injured one off, and we use a hunter's mark on their head honcho. Before anything else can happen, said honcho takes out our spider in return. We waste our turn missing an attack, and the only other member of our pack also gets got. We're far enough away at this point that the baddies can't catch up to us even with a dash, so on our turn we get a shoot at them and then use our boots of speed to maintain our kiting distance. Which of course means once again our foes can't reach us, so we give them something to chew on in the form of the ogre mercenaries we met earlier, and of course we keep the arrows and kiting going. For now, the enemies just ignore them and keep trying their hardest to chase poor Astrid, but no matter how fast they are, we are faster. We even have to slow down so we don't lose them. Then at last the ogres start wreaking havoc, causing every single enemy to turn and focus them, which is no skin off our teeth since judging from all the furs they're wearing, the ogres aren't exactly friends of the forest. Over the next few rounds, the ogres start putting in work, shoving folks off of cliffs, bashing them with clubs, and even casting some spells to melt them, and Astrid is no slouch with her bow either. The gnolls don't take it lying down though, and get their own retaliation on one of the ogres first, another one soon after, and they deal deadly damage to Lump, leaving him on 1 whole HP for like 1 round, and then they brutalize him. Good riddance. Still, this leaves us with only 2 of the nasty gnolls left, and with our hypermobility, they stand no chance and join the corpse pile of nature defilers. The folks we saved from the gnolls are kind enough to invite us to their den for a drink, but when we arrive at the nearby inn, we find the whole place on fire. We're not a fan of civilization ruining the wilderness, but we're not gonna let people burn to death either. Once everyone is saved and the oxes are calmed down, we head into the nearby cave to group up with the fellas we met earlier. As soon as we enter, we get enough experience for level 5, where we get a whole host of upgrades. For starters, our proficiency bonus goes up to +3. We get a first level spell slot, 2 second level spell slots, and a new spell in the form of spike growth to go with it, mainly for area denial and taking out groups of enemies. We also get extra attack, letting us make an extra attack per turn, and all of our companions get improved stats and new abilities alongside Companion's Bond, which is a passive that grants our proficiency bonus to both their AC and damage rolls. A further reward comes from the vendor Brem in the form of the Titan String Bow, a +1 longbow that has our strength mod in addition to our dexterity to the damage. Meaning so long as we have a Hill Giant Strength Elixir active, that's a +5 to all of our damage rolls, which for some reason also applies twice when we use special arrows, aka we just got way stronger. To put our strength to the test, we head to the goblin camp to get to work, starting by freeing this innocent bear kept prisoner. As the fight kicks off, we use our remaining shot to obliterate one of the goblins, and while the baddies run about, we get our improved boar to start raging. On our forest avenging archer's next turn, we continue our rampage, even taking out some of the goblin kids that are running for aid. Unfortunately, they get to safety anyways, and in comes more goblins to the blend defender. Astrid's companion at last gets in swinging range, but, well, at least he's tanky. And our hero herself is more than capable of doing some much needed damage. In retaliation though, the goblins start going after our poor bear, only for him to be revealed to be just some weird elf instead. Ugh. Now that we know he's capable of taking care of himself, we're feeling much less stressed about this whole situation. Even our boar is completely okay just tanking hits while occasionally dishing them out in return. Before you know it, our merry little team manages to work together and clean up the whole place easy peasy. Well, even if Halsin here is disappointingly not a bear, at least he appreciates our efforts, and it turns out he's also heading to Moonrise, so we send him off to our camp to go join Barkus. Since we find a dagger that gives goblins disadvantage on attacking us in here, we also throw that on temporarily in preparation for the ensuing massacre. Then we get to taking out some war drums, picking off lone goblins here and there, and definitely did not accidentally shoot a torture victim, no siree. After that's all done, we get working on the main room with one of the leaders, Priestess Gut, still inside. It only takes a few good shots to snipe her. Being as powerful as we are, we're not really worried about the run-of-the-mill goblins after the fact, especially when they all have disadvantage on hitting us. We take a brief moment to convince the imprisoned giant spiders to join us in any ensuing battles and keep going, which is a great deal for both parties, as now we're fighting Dror Ragzlin and his cronies. Immediately we bait him outside where the spiders are waiting to get their revenge on him, alongside our Raven, who has a ranged attack that deals guaranteed damage and of course can fly way out of reach. A hunter's mark on the big fella is all it takes to make Miss Fletcher's damage go absolutely crazy, while he's far more concerned fighting the animals he once oppressed. Unfortunately, one of his goons is able to take out the first of them, and another lucky couple hits is enough to ground our Raven. But because it's a once per short rest ability, we can summon it right back into the fray. The second spider ain't going down without a fight either. 2 more shots on Dror is enough to reduce his HP down to 2. Realizing his own mortality, he uses his last turn to simply remove the spider from the face of reality. But nature is red of tooth and claw, and our bird shows is also occasionally vengeful. Without their big bad leader man to pose a threat, Ragzlin's remaining ragamuffins are quickly removed. We dispose of one more room full of goblins, as well as a scrying eye, leaving our final foe, Night Warden Minthara, all by her lonesome. She is a tad scary with her whole person that we managed to resist, but once that's done, we just pepper her full of holes as she desperately tries to chase us around a now abandoned goblin camp. Having completed our quest, we tell the tieflings the good news, and they throw us a little campfire party in the wilderness to celebrate. The next morning, we get scouring the areas we've missed, so we're fully prepared before heading to Moonrise, starting by swinging by an arcane tower in the Underdark and breaking a chair on the top floor to grab the Club of Hill Giant Strength. This neat little club sets our strength up to 19, which is not as good as a strength elixir, but if we ever want to use a different elixir, we'll be throwing this on. Continuing our Underdark cleaning, we clear up the beach from all the Dwergar we left behind, show the Myconids a trophy that we picked up along the way, and have yet another party. Then we find ourselves in a swamp on the surface, watching an argument go down between 2 young men and someone accused to be a hag. As if to confirm our suspicions, she disappears in a puff of smoke, presumably to get back to torturing these fellows' missing sister. A hag is bad news for nature all around, so we track her down to her cabin where we find the girl in question. Before we can rescue her, she's whisked away somewhere underground while Auntie Ethel reveals her grotesque true form. The old lady's garden gnomes also decide to sow carnage and stall us out. However, their best efforts barely take a moment of our time to deal with. An illusory fireplace hides the staircase downwards, where once we enter we find mind-controlled victims of Ethel. Putting them out of their misery is the least our fantastic Fletcher could do. Right after them, we jump past all of her deadly traps with the help of a Featherfall scroll, pop an invis potion, free Mayrina from her dangling cage, and shoot down a darkness arrow to hide in, before at last spooking an invisible Ethel, starting the fight. While we're hiding in a darkness cloud, her and her clones awkwardly shuffle about since they can't actually see us. So we just get into a routine of sniping the real one and then maintaining a darkness arrow to hide in. Rinse and repeat for a few rounds until eventually the helpless hag is reduced to under 30 HP, causing Ethel to realize her life is in danger, and not wanting to deal with the headache of reviving herself, she begs us to strike a bargain. She wants to leave with Mayrina and her life, in return giving us a +1 to any ability score. Obviously, we're not very happy about letting her leave, but if she's coming back anyways, we intimidate her into leaving us both the girl and the power. Just like that, our forest princess has squashed a child's fable in the works and gotten ourselves a 20 dex score. Mayrina Janet doesn't really appreciate her chance to be in a parable getting ruined, but Astrid has saved enough helpless victims in the wilderness to know you don't always get thanks. As our hero's getting ready for bed later, this peculiar artifact we saw earlier shows up in our belongings, accompanying a voice in our heads. Since we can't get rid of it, we decide to just bring it with us. The next morning, we head out to the mountain pass, stumbling across Lady Esther, who tells us about some nearby Githyanki, and more importantly, sells us the periaptive wound closure, which will be our go-to necklace for the foreseeable future that maximizes any healing we receive, including from potions, making our action economy that much better since we'll just have to heal ourselves less often. Further down the pass, we find ourselves just outside the Gith Creche and catch a glimpse of them corralling cultists. It seems we may be able to get answers from them. First, however, our huntress decides to scavenge these ruins for any natural resources, starting of course by clearing this place of all the drunk kobolds that have infested every nook and cranny. Notably, we find a rather peculiar mace on one of them that our instincts scream will be useful later. Elsewhere in this place, we even find a different ceremonial weapon to go alongside it. Everything clicks when we find a magical room with one ceremonial armament already in here and slots for 3 more. That means we've just got 1 more to find. Searching for it takes us up to the roof where we find it's a warhammer in the nest of a giant eagle. It does put a bit of a wrench in our curiosity, but we promise the eagle we won't mess with his nest. Instead, we just use a generic warhammer which works just fine alongside the rest of the ceremonial weapons to give us Morning Lord's Radiance for a 1d4 radiant damage boost to all of our attacks till we go to sleep next. A buff that will undoubtedly be useful as we make our way into the homes of the Gith, who are not exactly peaceful people. We need a hard roll to even convince them to let us through the door without murdering us. Once inside, we talk to a Jachnir Jira to buy the Knife of the Undermountain King. This will be one of our main weapons for a long time to come. It has the wonderful effect of expanding our crit range by 1 and also lets us reroll low damage rolls. Unfortunately, the Shadow Blade part of its ability is bugged and does nothing, but hey, the rest of it more than makes up for it. Feeling about as powerful as we could get, we decide to go chat with the Gith leader to swap information. He is certainly more than a little intense with his hellos. He's incredibly interested in our little artifact, but not as interested as his god queen Vlaakith, who shows up to take a peek at it as well. Turns out she really wants us to kill the person who's living inside it, and we certainly aren't a fan of the warlike Gith, but saying no to a god queen who could vaporize us with a thought is probably a bad idea. She leaves before we enter the prism and find ourselves in the astral plane, wherein we also find our dream visitor and the voice in our head, who's less than pleased to see us. Apparently, she's been the one preventing us from turning into a mind flayer, so in repayment, we agree to let her live and fight our way past the Gith waiting outside. She's kind enough to grant us a temporary bless as well to help with the fight, and since only an amateur woodsman walks into a trap willingly, we do a bit of prep ourselves, even granting our bear companion an elixir of vigilance. The moment we step outside, both Astrid and our bear say bottoms up and down a speed potion. Then our bear whiffs a blow to start the fight. Thankfully, he hits his second attack, which is Honeyed Paws, causing Inquisitor Wargaz to drop his weapon and triggers legendary action summoning a spectral weapon that's a real pain to deal with. Either way, we're able to pick up the greatsword to make sure he remains weaponless. Adding insult to injury, we cast Hunter's Mark on him and then put his bony booty to sleep with a drow poison laced arrow. Our second shot is an ice arrow to maximize our damage and give him a chance to slip on his turn, while our final shot is an arrow of many targets to start weakening the goons. Then we skedaddle outside and close the doors, which for some reason also causes one of the goons to start moving even though it's not their turn. Sure, whatever. And we have our bird familiar start being a nuisance. On the enemy's turns, they start dealing loads of damage relentlessly, bringing us way lower than we would like and even killing our familiar. A lucky crit when it's back to us brings Wargaz nice and low. A healing potion patches us up, one more arrow whiffs, and our final one takes him out, drastically turning the tides. Next, our bear disarms one more fellow, letting us once again pick up their weapon before we drop a speed potion on the ground right at our feet, letting our bear break it, refreshing its effects on Astrid since she was out of actions. Thankfully, most of the baddies waste their turns just slipping on the ice. Only one attack actually hits us and we knock that loser prone too. Back to us and we use another ice arrow to eliminate 2 at a time, with our remaining 2 attacks taking out a third Gith as well, before we top up our HP with a healing potion. The final remaining crony does manage to dispel our bear, which only angers Astrid, who knocks him out with the drow poison just to execute the sorry chump right after. Our rewards are twofold. The first is the strange conduit ring which we get from a chest. This makes it so that as long as we're concentrating hitting on a spell like Hunter's Mark will deal an extra d4 psychic damage with our weapons. Reward number 2 is level 6, which gives us Keeper of the Veil, letting us cast protection from evil and good once per long rest alongside Arcana proficiency. And also Wasteland Wanderer Poison, granting poison resistance permanently. It won't come up too often, but hey, it's better than not having any resistances. With the most dangerous game defeated, we teleport back to Grimforge and get heading towards the Shadowcurse lands, where Moonrise Towers and a once beautiful land in need of rejuvenation awaits. As the fantastic Astrid Fletcher enters these Shadowcurse lands, the darkness encroaches, so to ward it off we use a handy-dandy ring we picked up last act to cast the light cantrip. Then we set off properly, keeping our companions away since they won't be much good, and for once looking for life and civilization as a bastion in this horrid place. Not even a few minutes pass before we stumble across what can only be a Harper hunting party. As we're getting ready to ask them what they're hunting, the shadows themselves come alive and answer the question for us, even reanimating the poor victim they just took into a twisted form of unlife, and thus our first fight kicks off as we get ready to purge our new antithetical antagonists. Immediately, we Hunter's Mark and get one-shotting shadow after shadow thanks to the buffs we still have active from last act, giving us more radiant damage on all of our hits. Unfortunately, our fellow hunters seem ill-prepared as they get absolutely clobbered, doing little to our foes in return. When it's back to us, we fail to one-shot one enemy, but leave it low and take out another in the hopes our Harpers will finish off the former. Sure enough, the undead fail to do anything meaningful and our plans work out perfectly. With Astrid getting another turn, she manages to take out 2 more of our opponents, leaving just the reanimated Harper left to be taken out by his once friends. Once they're all cleaned up, our new friends tell us they know a safe place and begin leading the way. Upon getting escorted in by Lysandra here, we immediately get magically restrained by a fellow nature protector by the name of Jahira, who is convinced that we're working for the Absolute because of this little parasite. Thankfully, one of the tiefling kids from the Druid Grove vouches for us, and apparently Jahira trusts this random child more than one of her loyal soldiers. Well, either way, just like that, we've got free access to roam the grounds of the Last Light Inn. As soon as we do, we head over to Quartermaster Tally and buy both the Cloak of Protection as well as the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail. The cloak, well simple, is all a little ranger could ask for, granting a +1 boost to both AC and our saving throws means this makes us significantly tankier and will be sticking with us for the long haul. The Scale Mail, meanwhile, will replace our Adamantine Splint and has a base AC of 15, but also lets us add our full dex mod, making it effectively 20 AC, and as a little treat, we get a +1 bonus to initiative. But that's not all. Next, we head to Damon and give him some resources we've been accruing in return for the flawed Helldusk gloves. These replace our gloves of archery, meaning instead of a flat 2 damage added on to our attacks, we get a 1d4 fire damage, which is on average a little bit more, and if we crit, a lot a bit more. And to cap things off, we swing by Mattis to purchase the evasive shoes, which basically just give us a +1 to AC, but with us using Hunter's Mark with our bonus action, they'll still likely be better than our boots of speed. Don't worry though, those will still come out for the occasional fight when we need to be a bit faster. After all that, it's time to have a conversation with Jahira, who tells us all about the immortal General Ketheric Thorm, who's leading the cultists at Moonrise. Her plan is to have us infiltrate and see if we can find out the secret to his immortality, but first we need to find a way to get through the Shadowcurse. Thankfully, this handy Harper has already laid an ambush on a cultist convoy, so off we go. To make things easier, we summon our Raven companion and get in position for whatever the heck this unnatural abomination is to roll up. A moment later, our prey is in position and the fight kicks off. Starting off, the big old Drider whacks one of our buddies while using an upgraded sanctuary on himself. So in return, we use our tried and true Hunter's Mark and start wailing on one of the cultist crony casters, unfortunately not killing but leaving him low enough for our Raven to finish off. Our temporary hunting partners do a little bit of damage here and there, while the enemy fodder mostly just throws alchemist fire and leaves the big damage to their big boss, who shreds through anyone he targets. Now that Astrid gets another turn, we go all in on said big boss boss, even using our bow's unique pushing attack to send him flying off the edge and reduce him below half health lickety-split. Both our loyal companion and momentary mates continue just peppering enemies on their turns, with the enemies getting a few licks on our side in turn. Karnas over here unfortunately also decides now is a good time to re-sanctuary. When it's back to us, we use a featherfall scroll in case we need to jump off our little roof, finish off one of the goblins that we can shoot, and top up our HP since the scary Drider can only multi-attack people who are missing health. The Raven continues its slaughter as well, leaving just one remaining crony alongside the many-legged leader. But before we can get too happy, the playing field gets evened out with the Soul Goon taking out two of our folks and Karnas managing to get one more as well. As things get down to the wire, we fire off one more shot, remember that our Raven's beak attack can blind enemies, and then fire off a second shot that barely fails to kill but does put him to sleep thanks to drow poison that we used earlier. Yet once again, the goon is a thorn in our side and wakes up the big fella, who's so laser focused on killing the last Harper that he dies to an opportunity attack from our well-positioned Corvid companion, who isn't satisfied with just killing the boss and even finishes off our final foe as well. Our reward for clearing out the convoy is the lantern they were using to keep the curse at bay. Only problem is it's fueled by a living pixie. Since that's far too cruel for us to use, we decide to take the risk and set her free. Thankfully, Dolly Thrice here is kind enough to give us a blessing of hers to let us bushwhack our own path through the curse. With that acquired, it's as easy as following the main road to at last get to Moonrise Towers. And once we arrive, we find some familiar faces from Act 1 pleading their case to General Thorm, who decides to ask for our input. Unfortunately, when we tell them about the atrocities these goblins committed, they seem to misinterpret where we're coming from. Either way, General Thorm issues the death penalty, which they don't take too kindly towards, but I guess they weren't CC'd on the immortality announcement. Now that they're out of the way, Kethra goes off to the roof and we have a chat with Rajo Blodra in order to buy the Circlet of Hunting. This cute circlet lets us gain a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls as long as our target is marked with Hunter's Mark, amongst other effects, basically just making us hit a bit more reliably. Then we go have a chat with Kethric's right-hand lady, the ever-zealous Zarel. Thankfully, this prey is very easy to trick and she immediately assumes we're the right person to go to the Thorm Mausoleum and track down a certain Balthazar who went looking for a very important relic. Since we have a destination in mind, we set out into the wilderness once more. Of course, these lands are still crawling with unpleasant undead, which means we've got to clear out the town square, the outskirts of the local hospital, and even the adjacent morgue. All this effort does mean we take a long rest and get rid of all the handy buffs we had from last act in the process. When we wake up, we head to the toll house and find Gering O. Thorm, who is right by a window and practically begging to get pushing attacked with our Titan string bow. Thanks to a vigilance elixir, we managed to go first, but our extra attack disappeared into the void, so we mostly just spend it running and casting Hunter's Mark. The baddies, for their part, spend their turns going after our poor old Raven, and when it's back to us, we weaken a couple of them so that our pal can get his revenge. At this point, we're far enough away that they all need a dash to reach us, setting us up nicely to shove one to its death. Don't ask me how that works with a floating skull. And we shoot another one a couple times to murk it too. However, they don't go gently into that good night, as they're hell-bent on killing our winged friend, but at this point, with the big boss still stuck somewhere below and only a few left, it's like shooting poachers in a bear trap. Once they're gone, all it takes is a single arrow to eliminate old Jerry too. Our continued calling finds us at the local pub next, where this time we encounter Thizabald Thorm. He wants us to tell him a story, but Astrid unfortunately ain't no storyteller, and so another Thorm decides it's time to be put down. The general strategy for us here is to take out the goons first, so we get peppering away and put down a web with our spider to keep the big man at bay, which works out wonderfully. Next round we realize that our new gauntlets burn away the web, but we've also got our boots of speed equipped so we can keep Thizabald at a distance with good old-fashioned kiting. We continue working away on the zombies, but before we get the last of them, Thizabald does manage to slaughter our spider. Still, the last one burns to death right after. Now that it's a 1v1, we just shoot the big fella, who is immune to all physical damage, so we don't shoot him for a lot, and then we run away with our boots of speed to force him to dash. It's a good thing that Astrid knows patience is one of the best virtues a huntress can have, because by golly, we rinse and repeat at least a billion times. Half an hour later, and we finally take out the second Thorm. The next Thorm in our side resides in the nearby hospital, but in order to see him, we need to put on a performance to get past the front desk. Thankfully, Astrid nails this one. Once we get in though, we see Malice Thorm is just as twisted and deranged as everything else in this place, as he's currently operating on a man who very much so does not need it, and so another fight kicks off. We start off with a hunter's mark as per usual, and then fire off a many targets arrow, hurting a bunch of the goons. Then we crit miss with an ice arrow, killing the patient totally by accident, but also fueling our bloodlust elixir, letting us crit miss with an acid arrow as well. Must be a faulty bowstring or something. Thankfully, Malice is more interested in using his legendary action on his own people, and only one enemy comes up to us via unconventional means. Our Raven companion and Crab familiar both get to work on the closest nurse in the meantime. When it's back to Astrid, she coats her weapon with crawler mucus, meaning our next shot actually paralyzes our opponent, giving us a free crit hit on top of it. The baddies once again all just dash about the room, and we continue to backpedal. Thankfully, first blood at last goes to the renowned Raven. We do get another crit miss on the literal unmoving target, but manage to get her with a second shot and weaken up the nurse right in front of us. Then we use the boots of speed to dash down to one of the bodies and pick them up, since Malice has the ability to resurrect them if they're just laying about. Speaking of the good doctor, he continues to abuse his medical staff while they do some groundbreaking research when it comes to eliminating crabs. Unfortunately for them, our ferocious Fletcher is here to rain on the parade, followed by using both our bonus action and remaining action to dash about collecting the bodies and get into a good sniping spot. The last remaining nurse is brought low a moment later, and now with just the Dr. Dearest, he is easy prey thanks to our ability to kite and his inability to go up these collapsed bookshelves. It gets even easier when our poison paralyzes him, and before you know it, he too goes down for the count. Oddly enough, on his body, we loot a loot. I suppose the doctor wasn't just into medical instruments. From there, we keep doing our best to clean up the town, bumping into Arabella, who we say can stay at our camp, and then Raphael, who definitely does not stay at our camp, but does warn us about a devil lurking in the nearby mausoleum. Then we discover some fish folk down by the shore and get depolluting the water in no time flat, followed by playing a little jig on our new loot for a comatose guard, waking him up in the process and learning about Thaniel, a young boy who happens to be both the spirit of the land and trapped in the Shadowfell. For all our hard work, we finally get level 7, giving us a new second level spell slot alongside Silence to go with it, just in case we're struggling against some casters. More importantly, we gain exceptional training, letting all of our beastly buddies dash, disengage, or help as a bonus action, vastly increasing their mobility. Good timing too, as we talk to Halsin about Thaniel, and he tells us things are about to get dangerous, so we summon our crab familiar, spider companion, and using scrolls, a water elemental, and even a couple of ice methods. We also drop a spike growth down and get the 411. Basically, a portal's about to get conjured, and we need to keep it alive for 5 turns. For whatever reason, when the enemies spawn, they don't aggro, so we do a bit more prep with a web, as well as a darkness arrow on the portal to obscure vision, and a little ice method breath blast. Then at last, they finally get annoyed when our elemental teleports right into their midst. With all of our prep work, things go pretty swimmingly. We're able to take out enemies at a decent rate, especially with the help of a bloodlust elixir and speed potions. Enemies, for the most part, prioritize shooting our summons instead of advancing, and when they do clump up, we have spell scrolls out the wazoo to obliterate them while creating ice, which of course just stalls them even more. It is no surprise then that our arboreal advocator is able to defend the portal easy peasy, and out comes Halsin with an unconscious Thaniel. Apparently, Thaniel has a missing corrupted half somewhere nearby, and we just need to convince them to recombine. Problem is, when we do track down Oliver, as he calls himself, he's not exactly willing to return. He's got a barrier around him that makes him immortal, and he's quite the summoner too, throwing out hordes of enemies round after round. But so long as we take out his summons, his barrier gets weakened, and now that we know where his playmates spawn, we set a trap for them, causing them to instantly die the moment they show up. After that, it's just a matter of time till the corrupted spirit is all worn down, and like any kid after a good play session, he just wants to go home, and so the spirit of the land is restored. Except for the one thing, still keeping it down. To be truly restored, Ketheric Thorm must die. So we're off to the mausoleum, wherein we immediately find a hidden doorway leading deeper underground with a few button presses, somehow leading us into an ancient Sharan gauntlet that feels about as far from wilderness as we could get. Before we're allowed deeper in, we need to first solve another button related puzzle, this time avoiding avoiding invisible walls by approaching first from the east and then the south. Heading to the next room, we see all the signs of a cloaker's lair, an aberration that only looks like an animal, but I promise you, these guys are horrible for the environment. And also somehow significantly smarter than our hero. Thankfully, smarts can't stop a dozen or so arrows straight to the dome. Next room over, we find a group of friendly skeletons. Well, they're friendly for now, working for Balthazar, who thinks that we're here to help. But sooner than he can let us into his hideout, the world starts shaking, portals start spawning, and undead Sharans start pouring out. Astrid gets to work on popping portals, which typically she manages in just one shot. Meanwhile, our bear gets to disarming the folks that do manage to spawn. The thing is, more portals spawn faster than we can take them out, and each portal that lives of course brings in more Sharans. Not to mention, sometimes we just fail to get the one shot, which results in the final initiative order ending up like this. Even though they take out our bear soon after, we're really not concerned since we have insanely high AC as well as protection from evil and good active, giving them all disadvantage. Things do get a little bit dicier after we lose concentration, but it's still just a matter of time as we pick them all off one by one. All it means is we've got to be a little bit more mindful about kiting. Afterwards, we at last have our chat with Balthazar, who wants us to retrieve the relic in the depths of this place but won't tell us what it is. And while we're tempted to kill him here, we decide to hold off in case we can get more use out of him first. Continuing on, we find our next lead in the form of a gauntlet of trials that only require a little bit of blood sacrifice to activate. The first of these is the soft step trial. All we need to do is jump over a trap, jump through a window, and then lockpick a door, all while avoiding the roaming guards. This gives us our first umbral gem, which acts as a sort of key to the door at the bottom of this place. We only need 3 more. Next up is the self-same trial, and based off of the name alone, our keen animal instincts tell us it's time to strip off all of our gear. A good thing too, since this trial has us fight a clone of ourselves made when we start the trial. Since we put all of our gear back on after the fact, this fight is made even easier, although I'm sure we would have won anyways. Either way, that's umbral gem number 2. The last trial is Faith Leap, in which we are meant to navigate an invisible pathway, but with these handy dandy platforms, we just jump past most of it, so long as we make sure to go back onto the path before landing on the final platform where we get umbral gem 3. Now, even though we finished all 3 trials, we're still missing an umbral gem, so we get looking around and find this library full of foes. They're easy enough to clean up, and once that's done, we find a secret room in the back that holds Dark Justiciar half-plate, which we won't be using now, but keep it in mind as it joins our bag of tricks. While our search continues, we stumble across a lonesome displacer beast. Chasing it down to make sure it's okay, we for once get ambushed by a fellow hunter, the devil Raphael warned us about, Yrgir. Turns out, he's not really a fan of Raphael either, and leveraging this to our advantage, we convince him to let us help him find a way out of the contract trapping him here. However, since we're free to talk to the displacer beast now, we find it has a worrying relationship with the devil. Sure enough, Yrgir has been drugging his beloved beastie with succubus spittle, which has the exact effects you'd think it would. Upon relaying the news to this poor feline, she agrees to help us murk him. And by golly, does this damnable devil need destroying, starting with our bear disarming him, letting us with a vigilance elixir go first and steal his weapon. Then Astrid unleashes every bit of her wrath that she can, even downing a speed potion to help out, though that attack is just a miss. Without his main weapon, the big fella can't do much, so he just throws out some bombs and marks our raven familiar. Since everyone else is surprised, they all just pass their turns, letting us once again send a barrage at Yrgir, getting him nice and close to death, followed by us moving away from both explosives and enemies, leaving them to take out their rage on our summons, who are more than happy to help fight for a fellow animal. Unfortunately, one of the Maragons decides to blow us up for real this time, leading to us taking some nasty hits. Either way, when it's back to us, all we need is a couple more shots on yucky Yrgir and the displacer beast has her revenge. With our bonus action, we heal up, and our final action refreshes our speed pot. With the big fella down for the count, the fight is easy for Astrid, but the displacer beast isn't so lucky, as every enemy is hell-bent on taking her out too, and there's little we can do but watch as she goes down swinging. We certainly can avenge her, however, and hopefully she's put at peace wherever deadly horse-sized tentacle cats go in the afterlife. Once the dust has settled, we even managed to grab the final umbral gem that we needed by Yrgir's throne, meaning we're free to find out what's at the bottom of this place, but before before we do, we head back to Moonrise's prisons and start yeeting the patrolling scrying eyes into the abyss. And also, whatever the heck this is happens, I gotta admit I appreciate the moxie of this guard who tried to arrest us mid-death. Either way, once all of the guards, as well as the warden, have been sent to the void, we're free to bust open the prison and free both the tiefling refugees as well as the Iron Hand gnomes and Barkis's buddy. Naturally, once we get back to the last light, Barkis is overjoyed. Unfortunately, Wulbrin Bongle is a complete waste of existence that reminds us once again why we prefer the company of animals. Speaking of, it's time to get back to our lonesome adventure and use all the Umbral gems we acquired to find out what's at the depths of the Sharan Gauntlet. On the other side of the Grand Door is a portal that leads us to quite the sight, a Shadowfell prison built to contain some unknown figure at the bottom that must be the source of Kethric's immortality. Unfortunately, we kinda just forgot about Balthazar, who shows up at this point to do something nefarious, no doubt. And to make matters worse, when we try and attack him here, he just goes nuh-uh and floats away while Astrid just sorta stares on. At least when we get to the bottom, we're able to get the jump on him, using our bear to disarm him and a speed potion to keep up the onslaught of attacks. Balthazar on his turn uses the world's greatest animate dead, summoning a veritable horde, and yeets our cat familiar into the void who is kinda just hanging out, and also that gives us inspiration? I don't know, man. Either way, the baddies start laying into our bear companion something fierce, even putting it to sleep. Back to us, and we use a bloodlust elixir, then an elemental arrow on Balthi and the bear, triggering said elixir with said bear, who is more than happy to fuel our onslaught as we fire arrow after arrow into a very tanky Balthazar thanks to his Spectral Aspect legendary action. Immediately after, our protection from evil and good is broken, and we're also blinded, yet we're tanky enough to avoid most hits anyways. And as it turns out, being blinded doesn't matter much if you have a lightning bolt scroll and a strangely silent invisible bomb. Like I said, the little goons aren't really a bother to us, so from here it's easy to clean them all up bit by bit until eventually the corpses are once again just corpses. At last we chat with the figure here known as the Night Song, who greets us by saying this, but when it becomes clear freeing her will end Kethric's immortality, we lay a hand on her. Thus, the demigod daughter of Selûne, Dame Aelin, is remade and ready to join us in kicking some bony booty. For our efforts, we at last hit level 8, giving us land stride, making us immune to difficult terrain, and even though it doesn't say it, also damage from spike growth. Our companions also get a wee bit tankier, and last but not least, we get another feat in the form of Sharpshooter. This makes it so we don't suffer attack penalties from being on low ground, and also lets us choose to take a -5 to an attack roll for a +10 to damage if we hit. At this point, we're not accurate enough to use this on every enemy, but it's still worth it a lot of the time. Before our final confrontation, we head to a hidden Sharan sanctuary in the center of town that lets us make 3 saving throws, 1 for each mental stat, and upon succeeding, we get a +5 to all corresponding abilities that last until long rest. To add on to that, we can pray at a Sharan statue back in the gauntlet to get necrotic resistance until the next rest as well. Once that's done, we gather our Harper allies and start the raid of Moonrise with a spike growth, which somehow draws everyone but us into initiative, and when we do join initiative, it puts us way at the end. Our allies also decide running through our spike growth sounds like a great strategy, proving they really are dumber than our animals. Either way, both Astrid and her loyal Raven start firing at Zarel, while the crooked cultists focus on finishing off our Darwin Award-winning allies. When it's back to us, we manage to get a lucky crit hit on the boss lady, but unfortunately failed to take her out. After taking out all of the frontline fighters, the enemies start pushing towards us, which is especially spooky since sharpshooter or not, we just can't seem to hit them. For what it's worth, Jaheira almost manages to do something to help us out, before getting counterspelled and promptly smited into oblivion and beyond. At least Zarel is equally useful, as her will to fight seems to be completely gone, resulting in her just skipping her turn. Even without her though, her troops do just fine at tearing into our backline. Thankfully, we've got arrows of many targets to even the playing field. The rest of our foes are less than willing to bother crossing the spike growth, which is fine by us since it means we're in a ranged standoff. As you should know by now, Astrid in a ranged standoff is exactly where Zarel doesn't want to be. And apparently, neither does the final surviving Harper, who just dashes into the spike growth. What are they teaching these people? They do actually manage to kill somebody, surprisingly, instantly, but less surprisingly, they don't last long afterwards. Since we've been picking folks off this whole time, at this point there's not very many folks left to pick off, and as they're determined to keep it a ranged battle, it's all the easier for our archer extraordinaire. Upon cleaning up the main room, we head upstairs and find a smaller fight awaiting us. This time it's just a necromancer and her necromites, so it's as simple as a few arrows let loose. Then at last, we're on the roof where our prey, now weakened and cornered, awaits. But everyone knows a cornered rat fights harder than ever, so it's a good thing we've got Dame Aylin here to help. As soon as the fight kicks off, with the help of a flying potion, we get on top of this column, use Hunter's Mark on the necromancer, and fire off just a couple of super powerful arrows to take her out. This does result in Kethric's aura creating a necromite cocoon that ticks down out of combat and spawns another enemy in combat, but hey, you can't win them all. Meanwhile, the big man and Aylin start duking it out, or well, Kethric starts hitting her while she just misses every attack before getting brought down to literally 1 HP by the goons. For our part, we get focusing on Thorm himself, while getting some collateral on the bony bozos thanks to many target arrows. He in turn knocks out Aylin, who I may have oversold as an ally. In my defense, you'd think a demigod would have a bit more oomph. Regardless, this fight is actually pretty easy for us. With the high ground, we can shoot General Thorm with impunity, and since he's exclusively melee, that just means hitting us is left to his necromites, who rarely manage the feat. Meaning we just need a couple more rounds and a few more attacks to send the old man reeling into a cutscene. Unfortunately, said cutscene gives him the ability to summon a giant tentacle, and our resident demigod is just as useless as she is outside of the cutscene. So we can't help but watch as both our ally and enemy teleport somewhere far underground. Naturally, the moment we clean up the remaining necromites, we jump right after them, landing in a mind flayer colony, wherein we find a whole host of intellect devourers that need killing, and one very familiar one that needs freeing in the form of us, from way back at the start of our journey. In return for rescuing them, we gain the ability to summon them to aid us once per short rest. Continuing on, we also find and free Zevlor in here, alongside a host of mind flayers, but this is one of the rare instances where our allies are actually really helpful and quickly killithid these illithids. For better or worse, however, our pal is hell-bent on escorting folks out of here instead of helping us with the big fight on the horizon. Elsewhere in here, we also find this big old puzzle that upon being solved opens up a door leading to a handy-dandy brain in a jar, who we're actually able to talk to once we plug it into a nearby machine. Once we get chatting, they tell us they want us to wipe their brain, and in return, they'll teach us a technique. We give it a whirl and find ourselves with the Githzerai Mind Barrier permanent buff, granting us advantage on all intelligence saving throws going forward. Now it's time to prep for the big showdown, starting by swapping out our bow for the Nair Misser and Hellfire hand crossbow, since force damage will be more effective. The Yuan T scale mail for Dark Justiciar half plate for advantage on con saves, and our boots for the boots of striding so we can't be moved against our will, all capped off with a heroism elixir. We also make sure to, as usual, buff up our summons, Scratch, the bear, and us. Then we descend into the depths and find our prey chatting with Gortash and Orin, the other two chosen of the Absolute. But they're not all they appear to be, as it turns out the Absolute is an Elder Brain, and to make matters worse, one that's under their control, not the other way around. Either way, the brain and our two future prey teleport away somewhere else, leaving our current target mostly by his lonesome. Since they're gone, we use flying plus invis potions to get our bear next to Kethric, Scratch next to a recaptured Aylin, with us and Astrid next to a mind flayer where we fire a shot to get a surprise round. As everyone is occupied, Scratch frees Aylin, our bear disarms Papa Thorm, and everyone else starts laying into the mind flayer for a bit before Astrid swings by the main platform to yoink our foe's hammer. Thanks to the surprise round, we're able to keep going and finish off the mind flayer before the big bad can even do anything, and without his hammer, he just kinda punches real hard. Either way, he's not a threat, so the whole gang gets to lay into him, shredding through his HP super quick. Unfortunately, even with no weapons, he does manage to take out a couple of our summons. Before too long, the old man is down for the count. That's about as easy as a hunt could get. Well, easy right up until he sacrifices himself into this big old bone pit and is reborn as the aspect of a god of death, but I think he'll find Astrid is not so easily scythed down. Round 2 kicks off with us using a darkness arrow to blind him and his legendary retaliation frightening us in return. So we use a speed potion fueled protection from evil and good to regain our movement and fly to safety. From here, our plan is straightforward. We get into a loop of flying down and shooting the big fella, topping up our HP when we need to, and using darkness arrows to either hide from his attacks or blind him. All the while, he just keeps hitting the whole battlefield, including his own ever-spawning minions with his Call of the Damned. After a certain point, he also starts eating them to heal himself up and give him access to Finger of Death, but so long as we have a darkness arrow working, he can't actually target us with it. While we can't reliably outdamage his healing, he can only do it so many times, as each time he eats a necromite, the max amount of them allowed on the battlefield is reduced by 1. After eating 8, the lonesome deity is stuck by himself. Isolated, worn down, and incapable of moving, our prey has been pushed to their limit and been found wanting. All our huntress has to do is finish the job. As the god of death falls like all the rest, we get Kethric's netherstone that was controlling the brain, find out that Wulbren Bongle is planning acts of terrorism in Baldur's Gate, and at last leave the Shadow Curse lands. But they aren't the Shadow Curse lands. Not anymore. With all of our hard work, the land has been restored, and our Green Guardian just can't wait to see all the beasties that will call this place home. Astrid Fletcher finally gets a moment of rest the evening before she arrives in the big city, only for her last day of wandering her beloved wilderness to get ruined by Githyanki forces attacking while our dream visitor begs for help. Thankfully, a potion of glorious vaulting is all we need to jump straight past them and into their portal, wherein we find a new group of prey wisely running away from our huntress as fast as possible. Not fast enough though, as some of them get caught up with friendly intellect devourers while we summon our bear companion. By the time we get the drop on them, our distractions have long since died, but this just means we get a surprise round to go wild. With said surprise, it doesn't take more than a few arrows for the first to go down, and with a good strength elixir fueled shove, we get the second one right after. When we arrive, in place of our visitor, we find a mind flayer in the process of getting their butt kicked. Since they're the reason we haven't been got by our tadpole, we don't have much of a choice as we settle in for our first real fight of the act. First thing we do is yeet one of our assailants closer to this hole. Unfortunately, it just won't let us use our second attack to finish the job, so we settle for a hunter's mark and an ice arrow to their prone bot instead. Our bear joins the fun a wee bit, only for the fellow we targeted to start chipping away at Astrid in turn. The others, meanwhile, all get to work on the intellect devourers, eviscerating most of them and leaving the Emperor here to do not much of anything. Back to us, and we at last manage to fit our foe into the square hole, down a speed pot, and fail to throw another into the void, but move them just enough to the point where we can't manage a second attempt. An arrow of roaring thunder fails to get the job done too. Thankfully, Flying Fist of Fury over here ain't too good at hitting us. Their buddy, however, is real good at exploding us. Either way, the fight starts getting cleaned up very fast as we shove one into the pit, and with a couple throws manage to get a second in the same turn, even healing up to ensure we don't get got. From here, it's just a matter of Astrid manhandling the last one off the cliff, and the day is officially saved. Unfortunately, our reward is getting hit by a deadly yap attack from our Mind Flayer companion trying to garner sympathy. But it essentially boils down to the fact that this fellow, named Orpheus, is the true source of our protection, and our pal here is keeping him eternally bound to save his own skin. And that certainly ain't the natural order. Since we can't do anything about that right now, Astrid's bear smacks the bully's staff out of his hands for us to steal just because we can. Then we have a final, well-deserved rest in the wilderness. Upon heading into the city, a human pup approaches us lost and alone, only to retreat away from us when we tell her chances are her mum ain't coming back. Kids these days, man. Either way, we continue on, and while trying to find a way past the security checkpoint monitored by the Steel Watch, we instead find a secret hideout right under their feet, wherein of course Wulbren Bongle tells us he wants to blow up a bunch of innocent gnomes, who are no doubt being held prisoner by the local tyrant as tools to create the very Steel Watch oppressing the people of Baldur's Gate. Astrid agrees that such unnatural creations can't be allowed to exist, but we'll find a more sensible way to deal with them. First though, we swing by the circus to see the sights, and commission a statue of ourselves to keep our animals company when we're away. As a side effect, this statue also gives Sweetstone features, essentially a permanent bless that grants a 1d4 bonus to attacks and saving throws. And while we're here, we also free a trapped displacer beast after it promises to not eat anyone. Oh, and a dinosaur too, but that one just kinda hangs out out in its cage anyways. Either way, our escapades get us all the way to level 9, which gives us access to 3rd level spells, the first of which we take is Daylight, since our instincts tell us we'll be needing it sooner rather than later. We also notably have our proficiency bonus increased to +4 at this level, making us better at pretty much everything. Continuing on, a Scroll of Fly is all we need to get past the local security and into the coronation of Lord Enver Gortash, Bane's chosen and the fella who's been ruining the city. The tyrannical tosser represents everything we oppose, but unfortunately we can't outright refuse his offer of a truce, even if we have no intention of keeping it forever. With that out of the way, we head inside the city, meet Scratch's previous abusive owner, introduce her to some point-blank retribution, free the other dogs she was tormenting, and start a shopping spree by meeting with our old friend Damon. From him, we buy the Legacy of the Masters, a pair of gloves that increase our attack and damage rolls by 2, and as a little boost also bump our strength saves by 1. After that, we swing by Gloomy Fentonson to purchase the Armor of Agility, 17 AC medium armor that lets us use our full dex mod, basically making it 22 AC armor. And to make it even better, it boosts all of our saving throws by a further 2. To continue our day, we break into the local Diabolus house, find a ritual circle on the ground that we already have some ideas for, and most importantly, find the Mask of Soul Perception. This little helmet gives us a +2 to our attack rolls, initiative, and perception checks, rounding out our new boost and making it dang near impossible for us to miss. At last, before heading to bed, we go to the Stormshore Tabernacle and give enough of a donation to the Supreme Ranger that she blesses us with Anointed in Splendor, a permanent buff that gives yet another +2 to all of our saves. When we make it back to camp for the evening, we find Halsin absolutely losing it after having harmed Scratch. We're ready to put an arrow between his eyes, but hey, it turns out it's just Orin, which if anything makes us even more ready. But she's come to tell us that she's kidnapped Halsin, and if we ever want to see him again, we've got to kill old Gordy first and then duel her to the death, before disappearing in a puff of smoke. However, first things first, a long overdue makeover so that all will recognize and some will flee from the guardian of all that is green. Now that we're finally ready, we get to exploring the city and find a familiar face in the midst of getting lynched by cultists. He may not be green, but our guardian gallops into combat. A hunter's mark and a single arrow is all we need to take out the first enemy, triggering our bloodlust elixir. A second arrow frees Volo from his bondage, and a third starts whittling away at another foe. In retaliation, they land a truly surprising amount of attacks on us in spite of our 26 AC, but it's nothing we can't handle. Our Boar companion starts raging at the sight and uses his charge to, well, back to Astrid, and she heals up, has her concentration broken, and barely fails to kill another goon. Not a great showing, made even worse when our targets continue to be unreasonable in their attacks. At least our Boar has decided to start hitting. Once again, we're obligated to heal, but this round Astrid is able to take out not one, but 2 of these ballist boneheads. From here, they are just incapable of threatening us if they ever were, and even though we continue to take the odd hit, they basically turn into a shooting gallery for our heroine to test out her new unerring accuracy. With the whole crew put to death, Volo is feeling relieved and more than happy to join us back at our camp for the final leg of our journey. Then we get exploring the city some more and find a therapist's office. Naturally, after meeting his previous owner, we decide Scratch needs this the most. Unfortunately, they won't let him sit in the seat, so Astrid is forced into it instead. After a few rather invasive questions, if you ask me, this lady says we have a violent heart. Why, I never. And she reveals herself to be a Sharan cultist by the name of Viconia DeVere, well inviting us into her basement. Well, she already thinks we're violent, so there's no harm in throwing on the Eversight ring and hunting some Sharans for old time's sake. Arrows of many targets alongside Crawler Mucus make the start of this fight a breeze, proccing Bloodlust and letting us slam down an Ice Storm Scroll too before retreating up the stairs. Unfortunately, Astrid gets the violent heart condition. Scratch ends up with battle scars instead of therapy, and a whole lot of enemies start lining up on this convenient staircase. Astrid then throws a potion to get rid of the violent heart condition and make herself immune to Viconia's legendary action, only for that to trigger it instead because it counts as attacking an enemy. Oh well, we down a potion of speed to shoot the enemies a wee bit more before skedaddling as far up the hallway as we can. Then we drop a wall of fire to the turn after, roasting any who pass through it, and forcing them them to walk instead of teleport to shadows by casting daylight on top of it. But we move too far away and they end up teleporting anyways. Whoops. Either way, they come out the other end nice and ripe for many target arrows, which, fun fact, if you crit with the first hit, then every single bounce is critical too. To end our turn, we once again move far away and refresh our speed potion, forcing these shoddy Sharans to waste their turns dashing once more. Rinse and repeat a little bit longer, and by the time they're all through the firewall, there's not many of them left, requiring only a few more special arrows to take out first Viconia and then the rest. Our first couple rewards for this come in the form of Viconia's Walking Fortress and the Handmaiden's Mace. The mace is more or less just a straight upgrade to our Club of Hill Giant Strength, dealing a bit more poison damage, and though it doesn't say it, it also has a chance to inflict the poisoned condition. Viconia's Walking Fortress, however, is a +3 AC shield that can reflect projectiles for a couple turns, has a damaging shield bash, and makes it so that all spell attacks against us have disadvantage while granting advantage on all spell saving throws. Obviously, this is insanely powerful, but we do lose our adamantine shield and therefore our crit immunity. Elsewhere in this place, we find a Mirror of Loss, which after passing a couple of checks, we're able to use it to trade off an easily fixable -2 to 1 stat to gain a permanent +2 to our dexterity. And we're close enough to level 10 that we can get there by exploring the city, granting us Hide in Plain Sight, which is so useless because it is invisibility that breaks when you do anything, including moving. Astrid also gets Bounty Hunter as well as Wasteland Wanderer Fire for a few extra abilities that might do something at some point. As one more treat before our journey continues, we make our way into a place known as the Guild Hall and talk to the barkeep who sells us Terrazul. For those not in the know, Terrazul is a huntress's best friend, basically acting as a 2-turn speed potion that stacks with speed potions and doesn't require an action or bonus action to consume. Awfully handy for a pinch. During our exploration of the city, we also found a vampire's palace. Wanting to right the natural order, our hero gets to killing our way past the front guards, making sure to just knock out the enslaved animals. Once we're inside the palace proper, we find a sinister door misappropriating the image of innocent rats. In order to open said devious door, first we need to learn how to read this dictionary we find in a dead girl's room. Then, alongside our wolf, we jump this skulking skeleton and steal his fancy ring off his now unmoving corpse. With both these things in hand, we're able to pop open the entryway and, uh-oh, this one might be a little tricky. Not because the monster closet here is particularly difficult, in fact they can't even really hit us. It's just gonna take eons for us to knock the mind-controlled animals unconscious one by one. Still though, 1 eon later and Astrid gets the job done. After all that, we descend to the depths of this place, down a necrotic resistance elixir, make sure our daylight is active, cast protection from evil and good, put on our boots of striding and drink a flying potion, and then wade into the fight. Attempt 1 doesn't go great as we get got by an unfortunate glitch, but attempt 2 kicks off with a blight to the face by the head honcho Cazador, and we're hitting the races. First things first, we down a speed potion and head all the way over here to slaughter some random spawn fueling the big vampire's ritual named Astarion, then we stuff him in our bag. Not for no reason, mind you, that's so he doesn't get resurrected. Either way, we zoom all the way back to the entrance to kite our foes and start trading blows with our vampiric antagonist. While he does hit hard, it's not enough to scare us. All we do on our turns is launch a few undead slaying arrows and top up our HP to make sure no accidents happen. To make this fight even easier, our daylight ticks down his health, and for some reason he decides that missing us with melee attacks is better than dealing guaranteed damage with lightning. All the while, most of the goons are stuck chasing our spider companion around the arena. A couple turns more of this, and taking a quick break to launch his caster goon into the void is all we need to obliterate Cazador easy peasy. Of course, we still need to safely knock out all the animals. Once the area is clear, we set things right with a good old stake to the heart, tuck in the old fellow, and call it a day. Freeing all those poor rats and bats is enough to hit level 11, giving us another 3rd level spell in the form of Conjure Barrage, a way to somewhat reliably do AoE damage. But more importantly, we get Bestial Fury, granting all of our animals an extra attack alongside improved stats, new abilities, and some fun new fits that you'll see soon enough. We even use one such ability to have our bear summon yet another bear. Continuing on, we find a group of fellow adventurers who have apparently been set upon by a hag, even having one of their members hexed. Hags have been a thorn in our side before, and as we remove the curse on this sheep only to find a Mayrina, it becomes apparent that Ethel is back in town. A buttload of crabs do show up to try and slow us down, but these animals are thankfully magically conjured, so we have no qualms with slaughtering them just a little bit. As it turns out, Ethel is already up to her nonsense, having kidnapped an innocent child. Thankfully, Mayrina has what we need to free the kid, so off we go to stop another problematic parable in the making. It takes a while, but eventually we track her down, summoning our raven who summons yet more ravens. Then we head inside and get ready to show her what for. Just like last time, she summons all of her clones to surround us, but unlike last time, we need to destroy these mushrooms before we can kill her for real. Thankfully, a cloud giant elixir sets our strength to 27 to help, and there's haste spores just laying on the ground too. After Astrid fires, her raven flies next to her, using its new upgrade to create a darkness cloud in the process. Anything inside of these clouds becomes untargetable by Ethel, meaning she just shoots at the fodder ravens that we left outside. So all we need to do is make sure we end our turn in darkness while we pop down the 2 remaining mushrooms, followed by us throwing the Hag's Bane Mayrina gave us to force her to vomit out the child the child she was holding in her stomach. 2 arrows and a couple solid pecks from our old pal the Raven is all we need to finish off that hideous hag, only for the child to not even give us so much as a thanks. At this point, we also decide it's for the best if we throw on Rhapsody, a dagger that we looted from Cazador that increases our attack rolls, damage, and spell save DC by 1 whenever we kill an enemy with it equipped, up to a max of 3. Now at last, it's time for us to focus on taking down Gortash. Halsin's probably getting bored of waiting after all. Our first step in taking down the tyrant is disassembling the Steelwatch Foundry. The moment we get inside, we see the Gondians being forced to make his infernal machines, but manage to regardless isolate and talk to a certain Xander Tubin who tells us their families are being held hostage somewhere in the city, and only after they're free can his people revolt. So we get searching the city, sneak into an abandoned warehouse, knock out some guard dogs, and commandeer a secret submarine leading to an even more secret underwater prison called the Iron Throne. Gortash starts blowing the whole place sky high, or ocean deep I guess, so we don't have a lot of time to free all the prisoners here. But with a speed and flying potion alongside a whole lot of pre-dashing before combat started, we're able to fly faster than our arrows and free pretty much every prisoner on turn 1, with our bird freeing those that we couldn't. Most of them even managed to make it to safety over the next couple turns, in spite of the fishman guards who decided they also want to get blown up while slaughtering civilians, although some do admittedly get sent to a watery grave. Once everyone is safe and sound, Admiral Astrid navigates the Gondians back to the surface. Now it's time to clean up the city well and true, ridding what once was green of this horrible steel factory. Unfortunately, the weak workers can't take care of themselves, which means we've got to kill their oppressors as fast as possible, using many target arrows alongside our Wolf's Lupine Slash, which is basically an AoE force damage attack. To make matters worse, a Gondian kills a guard with a Deadman switch set to blow them all up, while the other guards just get to murking them the old-fashioned way, besides one who also drops a motivator set to blow them up. Thankfully, our speedy Miss Fletcher is able to deal good damage to the guards and disarm not just one but both of the detonators. Regardless, it's not enough to save all the Gondians, still at least only one of them perishes before we finish the fight. Afterwards, we need to clear out the basement, which is in a very similar situation as upstairs, which means we handle it similarly as well, with lupine slashes, many target arrows, and bloodlust elixirs. Big difference is there's also Hellfire Watchers here, but they're just scrap metal so long as they don't hit. We do have to use a haste scroll at one point in order to disarm a motivator, but from there it's smooth sailing, as even without a Cloud Giant elixir, our damage output is completely wild. Some of the Gondians even manage to survive to the end. That's just how quickly we're able to deal with the threats. Before the final fight of this area, Astrid equips the Nair Misser for some force damage and downs a Colossus elixir, since we can smell the piercing resistant armor coming from the next room. Sure enough, we enter the next room and the Hellfire Steel Watcher Titan comes out to say hello. Turn 1, we Hunter's Mark one of the smaller bots, and yeah, that's about it. In return, they scorch our bears alive, melting one of them, but leaving the other intact enough to disarm the Titan, and one of the little guys to boot. Back to Astrid, and some custom order flash blinders from the Iron Hands are enough to stun 3 of our 4 foes, buying enough time to disarm a third with our bear. Rinse and repeat for a couple more rounds, and at last our bear manages to get the 4th and final weapon, forcing our foes to use their much deadlier Hellfire Exhaust instead. Maybe we should give them their weapons back? Well, with a few bolts, one of them blows up pretty fast, and if it's only 2 of them to worry about, we're able to heal up nicely enough. Shot by shot, we are slowly but surely tickling them down until we finally get a second, and shortly thereafter a third too, leaving just the Titan by itself, which really can't do much by its lonesome without its weapon, so it just kinda stands there and takes it as our eagle-eyed archer whittles it low enough to the point it decides to speed things up and explode itself to kingdom come. Since the coast is clear, we plant a rune powder bomb and watch as our fleet-footed Fletcher gets to safety, just in time to watch the fireworks. Wolbrin frickin' Bongle does show up to rain on our parade in his usual fashion, but Barkus at last has had enough and kicks Mr. Bongle to the curb once and for all. As further reward, we get our final level up too, granting us our final feat in the form of Tough, increasing our HP by 2 per level, meaning we have 24 more max HP than usual. With the Steel Watch disabled and Gortash vulnerable, it's time to get killing our way past all of his guards in his not-so-tough fortress, something we're well used to by now. When we reach the top, our showdown kicks off as Gordy launches a dazzling beam at both us and our bears. On Astrid's turn, she throws a bomb at one of his defensive constructs, casts a wee hunter's mark, and starts pestering the goons, who for their efforts do their best to do anything at all to our nigh unkillable warrior. Likewise, our bears aren't doing too much either, past their darndest. And they instantly die when a grenade launches and explodes with no delay. Well, they tried. Thankfully, Gortash's remaining defensive construct malfunctions and actually gives him vulnerabilities instead, making us do pretty good damage. Then something unexpected happens. We get hit by a command halt, so we can't do much but watch as we get hit by another command halt, and then another one after that. All the while, we're forced to watch as they wail on us turn after turn, but we're just so darn tanky that by the time we make it out of this loop, we still have a solid third of our hit points remaining, only to heal most of our missing stuff back up with a single potion, proving that these loser lackeys are really just rats that think they've cornered a mammoth. Once they're out of the way, we focus on the big boss again, only for him to transform into the Avatar of Tyranny, which makes him frightening only because he summons a giant hand whenever we hit him that deals 20 to 200 damage after a couple turns. But we've got remove curse scrolls which solve that problem for us easy peasy. From here, it's a matter of luring him to the edge, making him break it down for the whole city to see, and then using a thunder arrow to slam his body into the beach 100 feet below. Of course, now we have to climb down and loot his netherstone, but hey, it was worth it. Later that day, back at camp, we find a note from Orin congratulating us on a job well done, and telling us to head to a place called the Murder Tribunal. Upon arriving there, we learn we can have our bear summon a bear and then summon something else anyways. We also precast Blur on ourselves just in case. To no one's surprise, inside we find Saravok Anchev, another ball spawn who ruined the city ages ago, and now he wants us to become an unholy assassin for his old man. Yeah, that one is not happening. Saravok here has the fun legendary action to guaranteed stab someone who attacks him first. This is completely unavoidable, but his regular attacks are almost incapable of landing a blow on us. He does have goons running about too, but they don't actually deal damage to us so long as Papa Anchev is still alive, letting us kite him around relatively unbothered until eventually he goes down for the count. After that, it only takes a couple arrows on each of his goons to clean up the fight. From the bumbling ball spawn's corpse, we get an amulet that we need to enter Orin's temple, and before you know it, we've tracked our prey down and are precasting Blur while coating our weapon in drow poison. Unfortunately for our nature-defending co-worker, we're not quite able to convince Balls Chosen to spare Halcyon, and just like that, another fight with another god-blessed creature kicks off. To begin, we launch a mini target's arrow, managing to put Orin to sleep, but not really dealing any damage thanks to her 12 unstoppable stacks. Then we finish off one of the goons with an ice arrow, however, another gets us with a stunning gaze in return. Our Boar is also here, and at the end of each round, the ritual being sustained by most of the folks in this arena refreshes the boss lady's unstoppable back to 12. Next round, when she's awake, it also applies Ball's Edict to Astrid, meaning she has to kill something this this round, otherwise we die. A thunder arrow gets this done for us, completely ignoring one of the ritual chanter's sanctuary that makes it untargetable, followed up with another many targets arrow to try and weaken the remaining crowd, as well as a hunter's mark on Orin herself. Since she's back up in Adam, she spends her turn leaping all the way up to us, leaving her open to an attack from our Boar. Well, since that was her legendary action, we don't have to worry about Baal's Edict this round. Although it doesn't stop us from killing the remaining of the ritual folks so that we never have to worry about it again. Even though we killed those goons, Orin decides to summon more, so we kill those ones again, and then she summons yet more to join the fight. Naturally, we kill those ones again with a couple arrows, all the while whittling down the unstoppable stacks, but things start to change when we get infected by contagion. Astrid does at least manage to finish off the unstoppable stacks before things get really bad, but bad they get. As our contagion worsens, Orin summons even more skeletons. We learn that Conjure Barrage really is just worse than 2 arrows of many targets, and then the contagion becomes Flesh Rot, giving vulnerability to all damage. Seeing things are getting a little dire, we take out most of the summons again, and drop a Globe of Invulnerability scroll thanks to a speed pot, forcing Orin to do a whole lot of nothing to us. Next round, we do our best to blast her off the cliff after healing up, but the stubborn stabber refuses to go anywhere. Instead, the round after, we just drop the globe, use a hunter's mark, and with 3 measly arrows finally prove who the superior huntress is. At last, we have all 3 netherstones and are ready to take out the netherbrain. But first, there's one last poacher that needs to be hunted in this concrete jungle. Well, at least the portal to his domain can be opened in this concrete jungle. Either way, Raphael, here we come. As soon as we head inside, we find ourselves in the House of Hope, being greeted by Hope, who has none of her namesake left for herself. That is, until we tell her we'll save her and defeat Raphael, at which point she gives us a disguise to roam the house without worry and tells us a certain Orphic hammer can free her. Unfortunately, when we get to the archives where it's held, it's under magical lock and key. That doesn't stop us from looting everything else though. With the alarm raised, however, when we head into the hallways, we're greeted by some spherical sentries sent to stop us. But the hoary hosts of hell are little more than a road bump at this point, as we barrage them into non-existence while making our way to the boudoir. Once outside it, we find a multitude of one-shottable imps hanging out with a Cambion who looks suspiciously like Raphael, but wearing much more, scant clothing. And wouldn't you know it, on his corpse we find a key to Raphael's safe, wherein we find the password needed for the Orphic hammer. Also, Astrid ain't one for the comforts of civilization, but a bath in the boudoir that gives all the benefits of a long rest certainly doesn't go amiss. After finishing cleaning out the halls of the house, we swing back and the hammer is ours for the taking. Of course, we still need to free Hope herself, which means dealing with her jailers, a pair of deadly spectators. And when I say deadly, I mean they deal a fraction of her health each time they hit. Our bow, meanwhile, deals a solid quarter of their HP. There's no need to pretend like we're genuinely frightened of these foes, but we do occasionally have to heal up since their damage is largely unavoidable. Still, our arrows inevitably and unerringly find their mark, only making us tank for a few rounds of combat. Upon defeating the jailers, we're free to free Hope from her long suffering, using our newly acquired hammer. Next up, we get ready to face down Raphael by casting Protection from Evil and Good, feeding our bear a heroism elixir, throwing on the old Nair Mister and Hellfire hand crossbow to help destroy his furniture, and feeding Hope an invis potion. Then we head to the exit and get interrupted by the man of the hour, as well as this lady who Astrid really doesn't like, and the Displacer Diddler himself back from the grave. Just like that, our most anticipated hunt yet begins. Starting us off is the still invisible Hope banishing Yrgir once and for all. Next, Astrid fires a smoke powder arrow at a soul pillar that's buffing Raphael, only to realize that a regular bolt does more damage, and we drink a speed potion to rectify the mistake. One baddie decides to melt our Raven familiar on its turn, leaving Hope open to banish one more goon, before going back invisible. As a little prank, our bear uses its honeyed paws to knock Rafi prone, but he takes his revenge on the rest of our summons. Only our big bear barely survives this round. The second round has us using another 3 attacks to take out another soul pillar, drinking a flying potion and snorting some terror Terrazul to get us working on pillar number 3. Then we zoom far, far away. This does leave our bestial bond to get murked, but it forces our enemies to waste their turns trying to reach us. Back to us, and we have more than enough move speed to fly back in, take out the 2 remaining pillars, essentially neutralizing Raphael in the process, and fly as far away as we can before misty stepping even further, making it so that only half of our enemies get to lay into us while we sleep off the effects of both Terrazul and the speed potion. As you can see, they can't really hit us at all, so after switching back to our Titan string bow, we have the ability to just kite them around the house, picking off the Cambions one by one while Raphael watches in horror. When he does eventually catch up, he's only able to do about 50% of our max HP as damage using his strongest spells, which we can easily tank so long as we heal up. Soon enough, he runs out of juice and resorts to melee attacking us, which is even more heartwarming to watch. Yes, indeed, there's nothing quite like cornered prey, especially when they once thought themselves to be the hunter. Hasta la vista, Raphael. Unfortunately, like all too many animals, even after being freed, Hope is not quite ready to leave her cage, so we head to our final fight as always with just our trusty animals. Our talented tracker manages to stalk her final foe down to the sewers when, oh wow, that got a lot bigger since the last time we saw it, and it pulled us into its psyche. And the nether stones we gathered do literally nothing to it. And thankfully, right before it mind blasts us into oblivion, the Emperor does one last helpful thing and whisks us back to the astral prism just in the nick of time. This does mean that we let the brain destroy the vast majority of the city in seconds, but hey, I'm sure the forest will grow over it when we're done. While it's doing that, the Emperor gives us the 411 on what just happened. Apparently, we need to be an illithid to be able to use the stones properly. We tell him that sure as hell ain't happening, and in fact, now that we have the hammer, we're gonna free Orpheus, causing him to dip and join his arch nemesis instead. Once the O-Man is free, he is none too pleased to see us, but he does ultimately take the plunge for the team and become an illithid himself so that he can use the nether stones. Now at last, it's time to put all we've learned to the test and save the city of Baldur's Gate. First, however, we need to kill our way past the small battalion around the base of the brain, which is surprisingly easy when you have a buddy who can make black holes inside of people's skulls, can apparate even more allies out of thin air, and are nigh unkillable yourself. For what it's worth, they do summon a nautiloid ship to stop our ascent, but I guess they just kind of forgot that Orpheus can now levitate us straight to where we need to be. On the precipice of our final fight, we summon as many of our family as we can manage. Birds, bears, rats, little brain cats, you name it, and then we get a climbing. And look who should show up at the top but the Emperor, a now ill-fitting name for just another illithid puppet. Regardless, we can't let him distract us as our last hunt begins. Orpheus is up first as he downs a heroism elixir and dimension doors the two of us right next to where we can use the stones. Then Astrid uses a Featherfall scroll to bait out counterspells from anyone capable of it, allowing our illithid pal to take Terrazul to channel the stones safely inside of a globe of invulnerability also conjured by our hero. Unfortunately, he gets stunned, stopping him in his tracks, and then the round after that, we need to wait for the Terrazul jitters to go away, and then we get stunned ourselves. But eventually, we have both a working globe and a working channel, forcing the enemies to do little but watch as a portal back into the brain's psyche is opened up. The cruel cranium is cornered with nowhere to go, meaning we can just juice up with fierce perilous stakes over and over for as many turns as we'd like, each one granting an additional 15 psychic damage to our attacks. And when we're ready, with a couple of arrows of aberration slaying, the guardian of all that is green may finally rest knowing her job is done. All we need to do is command the brain to destroy its army alongside itself, and at last, the forests are saved. Well, for the most part. Here's hoping we're just back to hunting regular poachers after this. Wowee, thanks for watching, and sorry this one took so long in coming. We should be back to fairly regular uploads from here on out, but either way, this run was a blast, even if I was sick for most of it. And as always, a special thanks to our Storyteller tier members, Bunny Warren, Okan, Damon, Mark Rainbow, Vivian, Rat King, Rune, Lumina, Beltfed Joe, Chance Hine, El Guardia, Cluck Vader, Ramon Standalone, Witch Amy, and Jessie Kate.